mode.
Well, good morning, or if you're listening on demand, then good afternoon. Glad you're with us today. We're going to be talking about helping your organization make the most of this year. This is part of the Georgia Independent School Association webinar series we do here from Firestorm. This is Crisis Coach 2018 webinar series. We have done this now for 5, maybe even 6 years as the process has been going on. So it gives you an online demand training program that you can use within your school to make the most of the events this year. So I'd like to invite you to connect with us on social media. We have a number of platforms out there, and there is a hashtag for today's association and meeting. It's hashtag Crisis Coach. By the way, we man that hashtag 24/7 so we can respond to inputs and requests that you have at any time. There is a disclaimer today. We've got attorneys like everyone else, so this webinar or exercise isn't complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion or plan. Any work product must be viewed in conjunction with guidance from the authorities, both state and national, as well as your school's council. And then finally, this is not legal advice or legal opinion. I'm an engineer. You probably wouldn't want legal advice from me anyway as we look at it. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We help empower you to manage crisis and risk. Risk is looking at what's in place, and crisis is how you're going to handle that at the moment that it occurs. Our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach. That's one of our trademarks that we do many things under, and the concept of being a coach at a time when you need it is certainly one that fits well with us. We follow a predict, plan, perform methodology. I'm Jim Satterfield. I am the president and CEO of Firestorm, and I have good news. We were uplisted yesterday onto the Nasdaq. That's been a big, exciting opportunity for us as an organization. In fact, our chairman of the board rang the bell at the close of the session yesterday at Nasdaq. Our parent company is Novume, and we were acquired back January a year ago. So in a little less than a year, we went in rolling this up into now a public company traded on Nasdaq. Our emphasis is around the fact that every crisis is a human crisis, and I think that resonates well as we think about schools and what goes on in each of those areas, and we're going to share some insights that will help you this year to think about it. In addition to the uplisting to NASDAQ, we acquired 2 new companies as part of Firestorm, one on December the 31st, the last day of the year, and that was BC Management. They're a firm out of California that specialize in staffing and both permanent placements as well as for projects and programs, and they have a benchmarking program where they can provide you the ability to see where you are relative to others. And I'll share some more thoughts about them later. And Cheyenne is the executive vice president of that company and chairs that area within Firestorm. In addition, on January 1st, we acquired SEC, that's Secure Education Consultants, and it's a team of retired Secret Service, and they specialize in the security assessments, the active shooter, the other work in that space. And so now we have some resources that can suddenly make your job a lot more definitive from a physical security aspect, and we'll share some more things. So the aspect of becoming a public company and growing through acquisitions certainly have brought more assets to the table, and we look forward to sharing those with you throughout the year and being a support to you and your school. Jeff Jackson is the president of the Georgia Independent School Association, and Jeff couldn't be with us today. He's out on the road. By the way, I think Jeff lives his life on the road, helping schools and working with them, and I would encourage you to continue to reach out and be helpful. They're within the Georgia Independent School Association. It's a good opportunity to see what you and your peers are in fact doing together. I wanted to share some thoughts today when we think about this concept of crisis. And you're going to hear me today talk about the first person, the first hour, and in this case, the finest hour. I saw a movie over the Christmas break called The Darkest Hour. It was about Winston Churchill and his first 3 to 4 weeks as Prime Minister of Great Britain. And he was, it was great to think about him and what he did and what he had to face. And I think there are lessons there that should apply to each of us in the role that we play within our organizations. If you haven't seen the movie, I would strongly recommend it. It's, if you like history, it would be meaningful. If your parents probably, or their parents were around for World War II, and the stories and the impact associated with it is very moving. And looking at that, Winston was not the preferred choice to become Prime Minister of England. He was not well regarded at this time. Neville Chamberlain had failed in the negotiations with Nazi Germany, and there was a call for him to step down. And the only person that could form a government, they wanted somebody that they felt they could control, that would not be a leader, and that could be manipulated into the process. And so Winston Churchill was viewed as incompetent, a loser, and a drunkard, and someone that would just be easily handled. Obviously, that was a significant miscalculation on many people's parts. And as you see the story unfold in the movie, you get a real insight into the types of decisions that have to be made and the pressures that are on an individual in a crisis. And one of the things you've heard us share many times, that everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong, and that you're forced to make a choice between two bad options. And the movie drives those things home very clearly. When he was appointed Prime Minister, he inherited 300,000 British troops trapped at Dunkirk by the Nazi army. He had 4,000 troops trapped in Calais, also by the British army. And he was forced to make some decisions because his generals had told him that all 300,000 troops would be lost, killed or captured by the Nazis, and the entire British army would be lost, and it was hopeless to hope that they could prevail at any point along the way. You see him in the movie make some decisions that no one should ever have to be in a position to make. He sent a telegram, the only way to communicate with the general in Calais, and told him it was his job and his troops' job to engage the enemy aggressively, to draw them away from Dunkirk to Calais as possible, and that there would be no evacuation for them. He had to order 4,000 men to their death. Imagine the pressure and the impact on someone who has to make that type of decision. His goal was to buy time and to find a way to get those troops out of Dunkirk and save 300,000. He had told the admiral to get ships or boats from any British citizen to go over and get those troops, even 20 or 30 feet long, to pull that. And the admiral told him, well, we haven't had any volunteers. And he goes, it wasn't a volunteer situation. This was an order. Commandeer the boats, do what it takes. We have to get those people back. He also needed days when the weather was bad to provide air cover because Nazi Germany had superior air power. So he was waiting and buying the time with the troops in Calais while those things were in fact going on. Winston Churchill was the master, and as you see the movie, it's driven home in what was happening. And I saw this quote. By the way, he had 18 different quotes that have been cited around this concept of the finest hour. The one that you may remember is when he was in the shelters and the bombing was happening over London, and he said, for recorded time, this will be seen as our finest hour. But I'm going to read this quote and draw your attention to something that I think is germane to you in your planning and work for your school. To each there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. Think about the being unprepared, unqualified, and that's the role that we play with our plans, with our training, with our testing that you do in each area as we're focused on. Wisdom was a master of words, and words really matter. And as you think about that, and we're going to draw the attention today on who is the first person that you're going to call, or who is the first person involved in this particular crisis or emergency that's threatening your school. What's going to happen in the first hour, the decisions, the actions, the words, and how do you know if it's your finest hour? So we'll build from this today, and our goal here is to share some thoughts and direction that you'll stop and take a look at your plans, and then to determine, are you prepared? Are you qualified? And do you have what it takes to make whatever terrible thing happens the finest hour within your school? So as we think about these events and in the news and what we're seeing, we're always focused on that first-person perspective. You'll see them being interviewed in each one of those things. Their point of view becomes very important to give us insight and understanding. And in crisis, many times we see statements made from staff or people that they didn't tell us what was going on, we weren't informed, we didn't have that information. Those things become important. So let's go back again to this concept about our plans and how they start to come together. So as we think about crisis, a crisis is not business as usual. It's not school as usual. It is business as unusual. We're in a completely different area and involved. Think about the folks in California with the mudslides. We have 17 dead and 17 missing. We've had the horrific wildfires out there. It's going to be hard to have school in those areas, and what does it mean to each and every one that's directly involved? So as we think about it, look in the circle there. In a crisis, what is it that you want that first person to decide, do, and say? Many times in a crisis or an event, we see information getting siloed, not shared. So how is your plan broken down into decisions, actions, and words is an important way to start to evaluate it to see if you can make it more user-friendly, more helpful in each of these areas. I'll share later and again right now that most of the plans that we read and look at in schools, at best, and you notice there's kind of a disclaimer in my voice, they will tell your plan, give it to your newest teacher and new person that's in your school, and say, here's an event, use this plan and tell me what you would do and how you would do it. You'd find that most would fail. That's an important aspect. So this first person, immediately when you're going into shelter in place, lock out, lock down, evacuate, what do they know what they have to do? Do they have specific sets of responsibilities? Has that been trained? Has it been tested? And that's a role that you play within your organization. If you break down each of these components and start to think about who is it that we would look to if we were doing those things? Who is the backup associated with it? How does that come into play? So who is the first person that you today, hearing about how you bring solutions and value into your organization today? How do you make the most of 2018? So that means that someone in your school is already looking to you. And so you have to then break this down into components to identify who those other people are and what we need to do in conjunction with them. So when I talked about the what and not the how that we see most plans fail, first person, it's the first hour. This crisis is going to stabilize or it's going to escalate based upon the decisions, actions, and words in the first hour. So if you go back and review your plan and say, what is it that we need people to decide first? What is it that we need them to do? What is it that we need them to say? Then we can have a better outcome and a better stabilization. Now, we do a crisis index, and I think I've talked about it in other webinars, and I know as we looked at the year in review back in December in our webinar together, we looked at the crises and the tragedies that were going on. Now, imagine the shootings at the hotel in Las Vegas. Did they need to make? What actions did they need to take? What words did they need to say at that point in time? Look at your plans in light of the vulnerabilities faced at your school. Do you know for each of those what the impacts are? Do you understand how you would monitor to see if those were about to occur? Do you have specific triggers that would cause you to activate your plans? Do you know the decisions that you'd make for each one of those threats? Do you know the actions that you'd want to take? And finally, do you know what you would want to say in each one of those areas? So this is a way that you could take a simple yardstick and immediately start to measure where you are in the clarity around these items. This is going to make a difference in the outcomes within those types of events. So in the first hour, what are the decisions you make? What are the actions you take? And what are the words you say? And that's a simple conversation that you can start to take place now. So we've talked about the first person. We've talked about the first hour. Let's go back to that finest hour concept. What you see on the screen is the Firestorm crisis. 5 different dimensions of how you handle that crisis. Your decision process, your roles and responsibilities, your information clarity, your speed of decision making, and your communications effectiveness. And you can measure it across 4 different stages, from a liability and a surprise all the way up to becoming strategic and part of your culture. This is a good tool to use if you've had an event or you're doing a test to see how we're doing as an organization. And you see that each time you're able to move to the right, increasing your level of capabilities from a stage 1 all the way up to a stage 4, you get a breakthrough at each level. Going from a 1 to a 2, that's a control breakthrough. From going to 2 to 3, that's an alignment breakthrough. So you've got everything aligned in order to make the most of it. And finally, the value comes as you get to a stage 4 company, and it's strategic. It's part of the culture of who your school is. You have a culture here. You've got a mission statement about your school. So as you think about it from that direction, we can think exactly the same way as we think about the crisis and managing it to make it the finest hour. Now, if you evaluated where you were, and let's say you scored a 4 in every area but speed of decision making and you were a 1, that means your overall performance goes down to a 1. Making the right decision too late doesn't do you any good. So the speed of decision making is as important as any other aspect of it. But this gives you an objective way to compare what you're doing at each step along the way. So my goal is for you to help your first person. And we're going to delve into that topic, and we're going to tell you a little bit about Firestorm and what we're doing across these areas, because then I think you can draw the conclusion of what you need to be doing within your school. So we have solutions designed to assist before, during, and after a crisis. By the way, the fact that you're on the webinar today and working with us is you're probably concerned about what do you need to do before something bad happens. You're concerned about what are you going to do as it's occurring, and you're concerned about what do you do afterwards. In a school environment, for example, having a reunification program that you put in place and tested, how do we match students with parents after a crisis or a disaster or an event? Because every parent isn't going to be content until they see their child. Thinking about that now and designing it will make a difference. So I'm going to step you through Firestorm. You draw the conclusions for your school, and then we'll talk about some next steps. So as we think about this and we think about solutions, it's got to be end to end. It's got to be before, during, and after. Our solutions are designed that way. I would encourage you to do exactly the same thing within your school. Now let's talk about the 6 different verticals that we see of how we evaluate us and how we help others, but more importantly, how you can help your school accomplish things. We divide it into crisis and risk solutions. Crisis is, or how do we deal with that particular event? Risk is identifying those in advance and being prepared. So that's a particular function. If you look at your plans, do they address crisis and do they address risk and how? We'll go into more depth in each one of these 6 in just a moment. People solutions. Identifying the right people. Do you have the right people on your emergency team, on your crisis management team? Have they been trained? Are you mentoring them? Are you helping them get to be that level? Firestorm felt that this was such a major priority that we did that acquisition with BC Management and Cheyenne and her team, so that they can identify people and they can help train them and grow them into those job responsibilities. What training did you get? What support have you gotten within your organization in order to accomplish this? Next, security solutions. Again, another acquisition for us. We acquired Secure Education Consultants, and that's the retired Secret Service. No matter how good your plans are about this is what we do in a fire drill or what we do in another area, every parent today is concerned about violence in schools, whether it's bullying or active shooter or sexual molestation. The hashtag #MeToo has certainly driven a new level of awareness. You need to stop and look at your plans in light of security. It is a key metric for you today. Professional services. You're the person within your school that are providing the professional services to do the assessments, to develop the plans, the training, the testing of it, and how you get those accomplished. So if you sit today after our webinar and look at your plans, think about how those things are dealt with. Intelligence solutions. We've been talking a lot at Firestorm about predictive intelligence or protective intelligence. How do you become aware of what's going on around you? Clearly weather, that's fairly straightforward, but dealing with things like identifying behaviors of concern, that student that's at risk, that's thinking about suicide or has domestic violence at home, cutting, and all of the elements that come into play there. What do you have in place and how do you handle it? Analytical solutions. How do my plans compare to standards and best practices? What are the metrics? What's the data in doing the analysis? So if you think about your plans in light of these 6 verticals, I think you're going to find a way to see, this is where I am today, this is where I want to go tomorrow, and now this is how we're going to get there. I'm going to give you a closer look at each one of these quickly inside of Firestorm, then you'll be prepared to draw the conclusions inside of your school. So when we think about crisis and risk solutions, we follow our predict, plan, perform methodology. Predict what the vulnerabilities and threats are, how are we going to monitor them, what are the triggers that would activate their plans, what are the things that we will do, the decisions that we have to make for each one, and what are the words that we need to say. So if you think about that within your organization, think about your emergency response program, your incident management, your crisis management. The crisis index is what we've talked about in other webinars, but how do you compare this crisis to another? We were meeting with a school yesterday, and we were talking about outrage, fault, and fear. That forms the crisis index. Is there going to be outrage about this event? Is there fault as a result of that? Is there fear? So being able to understand where you are in the crisis process as it unfolds in light of that lets you see, are our plans working? Are we having an impact? How can we make a difference? Firestorm set up a 24/7 real-time response. We have a crisis operations center that's managed now 24/7. How do you manage crises in your school after hours and on weekends? Because in many cases, the events are going to arise at an inconvenient time. to deal with. We own the term crisis coach. Who is your crisis coach internally? Who's going to help your people to grow and better understand? What can we do to help? And then training and exercises. And then Firestorm has provided the Georgia Independent School Association a program called Crisis Stop. If your school finds itself in a crisis, you can pick up the phone and call us 24/7, and there will be no charge for the first hour of support to help you stabilize the event, to trigger the resources that you need, to opine on the consequences that will occur, and finally then help you prevent the common crisis mistakes. So look at your plans. Think about crisis and risk solutions. The next area I would direct you to is to think about your people. Staffing, both temporary and permanent, and then even interim if you've had some transitions on it. Firestorm has set up an expert council because we can't be all things to all people. So we have 130 nationalized experts. Who are the experts that you would call in if you needed assistance? Clearly, Firestorm is there. Coaching, what coaching do your people need? And then maybe you need having an external consultant to come in, someone like Jason Russell, who's our Chief Security Officer, to look at your facility. Where are the vulnerabilities? What are the things that could be put into place? Virtual staffing. Firestorm's prepared to serve as your virtual Chief Security Officer, or if you're concerned about cyber, your virtual chief, your cyber information security officer. So as you look at those things, how can you do it? But look at the middle there on that last line, helping your people grow. What are you doing in 2018 to help your people grow to be accomplished within that? Mentoring is a key way that we've shared and others have shared within it. Who is mentoring your people? Who's mentoring you as you look through and to become better? Unfortunately, security is now a significant exposure factor for schools, whether we're talking physical violence, suicide, domestic violence, sexual molestation, bullying. It's there, and unfortunately it's growing, and we're seeing it not abating. So consulting, training, and education, and looking at each of these things, there are components that you need to have in place. You see a quote from Jason Russell, who's our Chief Security Officer. Our mission is to provide presidential level protection for those in your charge. And that's one of the advantages of leveraging our Secret Service agents in order to get those insights. Have you had an active shooter violence assessment for your school? How your plans compare to what the requirements are for best practices? There are 5 separate dimensions included within that. Having a security assessment of your site. Cybersecurity, schools are increasingly being targeted because of the information. Getting certification for your active shooter training and your people that are involved in it. We're doing this now, by the way, as early as in the preschool and the early childhood education area, going through, because the hardest call that anyone will ever have to make is to that parent to say your child's not coming home from school today. Threat assessments or behavioral management assessments. That BERTHA stands for the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program that Firestorm has launched to identify those behaviors of concern before they escalate to violence. And now there's an online training program through the University of Alabama for that program. You can have that immediately available for your school. Increasingly, we're working with architects as schools are designed and built, or you're doing additions, to build the security into that to make this part of your capital fund as opposed to just an ongoing expense. Professional services are what you do, how you're assessing your current situation, addressing it, and acting. And you're doing these types of things with your programs. You're providing critical decision support to your leadership to make those choices as we think about them. And in many cases, those are very difficult. Developing your plans, training, exercising. Do you have a crisis communications plan? What would you say under each one of the vulnerabilities and threats that you've identified? Let's go on and plan those messages now. Getting an assessment of your plans. There are tools and templates that are out there that we can help in fit it into your budget and program. Intelligence tools, and this is an area that we find is a big gap across many schools and in fact many businesses where they haven't thought about how do we know that what we're concerned about is likely to happen or is going to be happening now. So they're both predictive as well as protective as well as ultimately preventive. Now there are some tools that you may already have. Whoever's handling your development within the school to raise funds at this point may have some marketing tools that measure the effectiveness of the ads and the programs that you're running. Those types of marketing tools can easily be converted into risk management tools, and we can show you how to do that. What's the risk profile that you're looking for, creating that? If a threat comes in, how do you alert people? How do you manage that process? What are the words that we're looking for? And this goes back to semantics, context, and syntax. And the advantage here is in today's world, if someone has ill intent, 80% of the time someone else knows, and 67% of the time 2 or more people know. And when they know, what do? They talk on social media. So you can use open source intelligence to identify there's a potential threat or a problem within your school. So it's a real-time threat identification, escalation mapping, how does this information flow, what are the decisions, and then analysis of these events as they occur to how do you continue to improve. So think about what is your intelligence approach within your school. And then analytical solutions, looking at how do you compare with other programs in schools, benchmarking. We have capabilities to do that for you and have done analytics so that we know many things about these types of events and can share that with you. We can certainly do a survey and let you know how you compare to other schools across the country, or we could even work out and do one with just looking in the GISA and designing those elements. So there are metrics and diagnostics. Just knowing about those elements will make a difference in your program. But how does our school compare? You certainly know how your school compares on an academic basis. You know how your sports teams compare from looking at that. How do your programs compare in these areas would be the next level. So we've given you a lot of insight. And so what I think that you want to think about is take an innovative approach. Let's look at who we are and what we do to get our school to where we need it to be. Now, I want to leave you with some additional information today to think about. In a crisis, there are 3 types of communications that are going to be done. And the reason to emphasize this, schools significantly harm themselves and their perceptions with their students, their teachers, and their parents, and how they're communicating in a crisis. There are 3 types of crisis communications. The first is coordination. What do you need them to do? Shelter in place, lockout, lockdown, evacuate. How does that message go out? What's the notification system that you're using? What is it that we're talking about? This is always your first communications in any crisis. So let's write them down now. Let's have the message map so that we understand exactly how that's going to happen. The second is around communicating about the crisis itself. This communication will happen later. It will probably happen the next day, not the day the event is going on. We are going to be telling people what they need to do, but recognizing that most everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong. Now we want to verify those facts and have those communications go out. In general, we don't think that the head of school should be this initial communicator. There will be a time for the head of school to speak, but not in the first day. That's a later element within the process. And finally, there's compliance communications that you must do in a crisis. You're a mandated reporter. A school has to communicate if they think that a child is at risk. So if you see domestic violence in the home or threats are made against a child by another, then you're a mandated reporter, whether that's to the police or family services. you must do it. Clearly, cyber, if someone's identity or information has been compromised, you're a mandated reporter there. And there's an increasing targeting of schools to get their information because of the data that you have. And in addition to financial data, you have personally identifiable information, you have personal health information, you have HIPAA information. So you've got unique requirements in each of those areas to look at. So I would challenge you for 2018, one of the ways that you should be thinking about improving your program is documenting your crisis communications program. What are your home bases? What are your message maps for each type of a threat and the questions that would come as a result of it? In many cases, you're prohibited with sharing information with someone who's not their parent. So many times parents want to know, well, what are you doing to that child? Why wasn't I informed? And those are tough questions to answer. Now is the time to be thinking about them, not later. So we follow a predict, plan, perform methodology. We think it's simple. We think it's straightforward. And I think it's a way for you to start to look at 2018. Do you understand your vulnerabilities, threats, and impacts? Do you have a program to monitor each one of those? Do you know for each one, what are the decisions, what are the actions, and what are the words? Give yourself a grade on your program. You can easily do that and directly look. Under your plans, do you have policies and procedures? Many times we find that the plans may have a policy, but there's no process, there's no procedure. There's no person assigned. There's no first person there. There's clearly no instruction of what's done in the first hour, and there's not the how detail to carry it through. Give yourself a grade on where you are in the plan portion of your plans. Under perform, we should not ask everybody the first time they act is going to be in a real crisis. What training have you done? What work have you done around exercising and testing your plans? And that works. And we've got a major lesson there that we've learned from fire. In over 50 years, we've not had a single child die in a school fire in the United States of America. Not one in over 50 years. Well, how could that be changed? Well, think about the new building codes. Think about the design structure with sprinklers and secure stairwells. Think about the heat detectors and smoke detectors, the alarms that go off. Think about the training and the number of times that you do an evacuation exercise. And so with all of those combined, we've been able to create an environment where not a single child has died in a school fire in over 50 years. Can you say the same thing about violence today? There are 2 million episodes of bullying in America annually. Think about your school. Think about what's been going on. We cannot say that we haven't had a child impacted by violence in America in 50 years. We can't say it in 50 months, 50 days, or even 50 hours. This is an area where if we don't change how we operate, we're going to continue. Element is extremely important to see. Identifying the behaviors of concern now and intervening before they escalate to violence will change, and we will at some point be able to make a statement. We've not had a single student die. Unfortunately, that can't come too quick. You do have an advantage with the birther program that you can learn to do that and do it effectively within your school. So Winston Churchill, The Darkest Hour, I would strongly encourage you to go see the movie. I think you'll get a much better understanding as you see the impact of decisions, the pressure that it takes to make those decisions, and then the dealing with consequences within those. I was always a Winston Churchill fan. I had read books before, but I had never focused on those critical first month in May of where he was tested in each of these areas. And you saw the frustration, you saw the pressure that he was under. And he was an imperfect man, but he was also the perfect man at the right time. So as we think about you and your school, no one wants to pick up that phone and call a parent and say, your child is not coming home from school today. I was fortunate enough to have been on the ground at Virginia Tech, leading a team of 10 people immediately after the shootings there. We've all seen the trauma and drama that's happening today. And so the goal that I would give to you for 2018 is to first make sure that your people are prepared, that they're qualified, and that they're ready for their finest hour. We've given you a structure to think about. We've designed it so that you don't have to worry about where do we start. And as a reminder, give your plan to one of your newest teachers. Describe a situation or an event or an incident, and then say, use this plan and tell me what are you going to do and how you're going to do it. If they can't do that, if it's unclear, if it isn't documented, you're not going to get the results that you want. And you're going to be forced to make the kinds of decisions or the kinds of communications with parents that we've all wanted to avoid. So what's next? Well, we're going to start first, and you can download today's session so that you can share it with others in your school. There will be a brief around today, and there are many Firestorm no-fee resources on the website that you can access and use to start to improve. Number two, you can then contact us, and we'll do an assessment with you at no fee. We'll have a process to go through and help evaluate, looking at 5 dimensions of where your plans are, particularly from a security and a vulnerability standpoint associated with it. You get a report afterwards, and it would be useful to you to be able to use with your board or your senior leadership to get the funding to be able to put these programs in place that you really need. We also are, through our commitment with GISA, have our Crisis Stop program. If you find yourself in a crisis, or if you think you're in a crisis, pick up the phone and call us, as people do every day. We'll get on the phone with you in that first hour, and there is no charge. We'll help you stabilize the event. We'll help trigger the resources that you need. We'll opine on the consequences to come. And then finally, we'll help you prevent the common crisis mistakes. That's available to your school as a result of your GISA membership, and it's done at free of charge. Next, I would register for next month's webinar and then other events that are coming up. There will be an exercise toward the end of the quarter that you can put your team around the table and see what it's like to make decisions in these types of crises and events. So my thoughts go out to the Georgia Independent School Association and thank them for underwriting this webinar series and sharing that information with schools and supporting it. This goes back a number of years that we've worked together. If you have questions, you can reach out to us at firestorm.com, our website, or you can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. If you're in a crisis and call us, make sure you state that at the very beginning so that we can get you connected to a crisis coach to begin that level of support. My hope is that you don't wait until there's a crisis. My hope is that you'll start to involve us now as you're assessing your plans, understanding where you are relative to standards and best practices, getting the training, getting the materials that you need, and getting those things accomplished before it's too late. I want to thank you for everything that you do within your school, the support that you give to our young people, the growth from an education, moral, ethics elements, the athletics. The calling and your mission has been to deliver that, and you truly are making a difference. We're here to help, we're here to support, and as we're facing these common threats and exposures that are today, I've been asking most of the audiences that I've been speaking with about, do you feel we're in an area where, in a time where violence is increasing or decreasing? And universally it's said that it's increasing. Now is the time for us to make sure that we're ready and have the solutions in place in 2018 that we didn't have earlier. Thank you for your time. I look forward to speaking with you again next month. Reach out to us, get the brief, get the other information, take a look at that assessment. Talk to you later and have a wonderful day. Jim Satterfield, goodbye.